Fox News alert, as we are now learning more about the suspect charged in a bloody attack at a New York Hanukkah party, with reports that this was not his first run-in with the law, but, as Laura Ingle will tell us about, he was out of jail, and there's a lot of questions about that. Thank you, Laura.
There are a lot of questions, Leland. The suspect in the Hanukkah attack was arrested on a string of charges in September of 2018, including menacing a police officer, but was let go. Now, that order was made by a judge who was tracked down by the New York Post, which reports today that he told the paper he couldn't comment on the proceedings because it was a sealed case. Now, according to the Post, the suspect, 37-year-old Grafton Thomas, was also charged in 2018 with possession of a weapon and reckless endangerment. The case involving Thomas resulted in an adjournment of contemplation of dismissal, which in layman's terms is a benefit of the doubt ruling, meaning that the suspect will be released with the understanding that if he or she doesn't commit a crime within a year's time, the case at hand will be dismissed and sealed. So Thomas was charged now with 5 counts of attempted murder after the Saturday attack that left several people severely injured. He has pleaded not guilty. His lawyers say Thomas suffers from mental illness, and a pastor who knows the family said and told the Post that Thomas's mother pleaded to have her son committed for inpatient treatment during a May 14th court hearing, but the judge there refused. The family for one of the victims, Yusuf Newman, released a statement updating the public on his condition after suffering multiple stab wounds which penetrated his skull and shattered his arm, saying in part this: "Our father's status is so dire that no surgery has yet to be performed on the right arm. Doctors are not optimistic about his chances to regain consciousness. And if our father does miraculously recover partially, doctors expect that he will have permanent damage to the brain, leaving him partially paralyzed and speech impaired for the rest of his life." In addition to the state charges, Thomas has also been hit with federal hate crime charges that could send him to prison for life. His next court date is Friday. Leland.
And we will await developments there at that court date. Laura, thanks so much. Heather's got more.
So for more on this, Fred Teesey, former federal prosecutor, thank you for joining us, first of all.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. You no doubt heard what Laura was reporting there. A horrible crime, using a machete, breaking into this rabbi's personal home, critically injuring several people. And this isn't the first time that he's been in trouble.
It isn't, Laura. It isn't. And the whole problem, the thing is this: I don't do criminal defense work, so I'm not really here to defend the guy. And I think he should go away for an awful long time for a very serious crime. But here's the problem with this, and I used to see this a lot of times as I was a prosecutor. It's very easy to kind of go back with 20/20 hindsight and question what this judge did, but you can't do it, and we can't do it without understanding the law in New York. First of all, the law in New York does not allow a judge to consider the safety of the community in connection with the setting of bail, which is ridiculous. When I worked in the federal system, we were allowed to have people detained without bail if we could show that they presented a danger to the community or a risk of flight. So that's not an option open to a New York judge. You know, New York does have this thing called Kendra's Law, which came back from 1999 when a man suffering from schizophrenia pushed a woman in front of the N train in New York and killed her. But in order to effectuate that law, you have to show multiple arrests or multiple hospitalizations before refusal to take treatment. So on the record that I've seen so far, what this guy did is horrible. But I'm not so sure that there were kind of any yellow flags or anything that could have been done in the past to try to avoid this during the last time this guy had an interaction with the criminal justice system.
You know, that takes us into the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and we'll kind of meld the two together. This new law that goes into effect today in New York regarding bail that would allow people who commit hate crimes to be released.
Correct.
So how does that tie in?
There's a new law in New York that basically denies judges the opportunity to provide bail for a bunch of crimes, including assault without physical harm and stalking and drug crimes, which, quite frankly, I don't care what these progressives tell you, drug crimes are the most violent crimes. They rip apart neighborhoods. They kill people. They result in death and destruction wherever they are. And from now on going forward, the state of New York judges cannot impose bail or conditions of bail on any individual charged with certain crimes. And what's worse about this is that they're also not allowed to continue to consider the safety of the community, which a lot of other courts can. California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois. Judges can take into consideration the danger to the community of letting somebody out and deciding not to impose bail or deciding to impose a bail that was very high.
Yeah.
Not so in New York.
It seems like there's a lot of common sense perhaps missing from some of this. Just what was it? When we also were reporting on this, there was the most recent case prior to this mass stabbing where a woman here in New York had been arrested for attacking 3 different Jewish women. She was released, and then the very day that she was released, she was arrested on yet another attack.
Right. And again, you're absolutely right. A little bit of common sense would go an awful, awful long way. I mean, you see these people in courtrooms all the time. I did this for years and years, and everybody in the courtroom knows that they're a danger to the community. These people are standing up there, and yet the judges let them out on bail, and they shouldn't. And there's far, far too many incidents, and quite frankly, far too much analytical data supporting the contention that people who are a danger to the community are going to continue to commit violent crimes, continue to affect the safety of law-abiding citizens if they are out on the street with no condition or combination of conditions that would assure the safety of the community.
Yeah, and what's the incentive to return to court?
None. Well, none. I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, that was the whole purpose of bail, right? If you have bail, and even if someone said you had a $50,000 bail, 10%, you still had to put down $5,000. And if you didn't show up, or if your family pledged that money, they would lose that money. So that was always a very strong, effective tool for ensuring that people show back up. Yeah. I mean, people who fail to show up, I mean, they just disappear into the night. We never see them again. And the next time we see them, they've committed either another crime or a worse crime or a violent crime. Which is just an unbridled disaster.
You know, was this latest case, was it in fact a case of domestic terrorism, as Governor Cuomo called it? And then the second thing I have to ask you before we wrap up is where you have Mayor de Blasio blaming the rhetoric of President Trump.
You know what? I'll start with de Blasio first because that's a cheap shot. You know, quite frankly, I could lay out about 15 different things that he's done that basically undermines the safety of law-abiding citizens, and that's most of the people who lived in New York City as a result of his practices and policies. So, like, forget him. As far as whether or not it's an act of domestic terrorism, I mean, you know, we can argue all day long about the term to give it. It's a hate crime, and under federal law, it's a hate crime, and irrespective of how sick this guy is, quite frankly, I don't think he's as sick as you like to think he is. I've seen evidence that he actually tried to bleach the blood out of his car, which is evidence of consciousness of guilt, which is evidence that he knew he did something wrong. And so this guy should have the book thrown at him on federal charges and spend, quite frankly, the rest of his natural life in jail for 5 counts of attempted murder on a hate crime.
Yeah, and evidence that prior to this attack, he had looked up anti-Semitic information online and that type of activity.
Correct. So that shows premeditation. That shows motive. That shows that, you know, this wasn't some guy, some crazy guy who said that the aliens told him to just go attack 5 Jewish people celebrating Hanukkah in a rabbi's home. What this guy did, and I think when the evidence starts to come out and good old-fashioned law enforcement will gather it, it will show that what he did was a premeditated hate crime and for which he should be punished severely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.